Griffin.
Madam President,
Mr. Griffin.
when we discuss violence against women, there is a desperate attempt to avoid mentioning the giant green elephant in our midst, Islam, whose inherent devaluing of women and hostility to unbelievers combine to make it the greatest threat to millions of women and girls in many parts of the EU. In Britain, the crime of on-street grooming for sex, drugs and prostitution is directed against thousands of girls as young as 10. Many of the victims are beaten and threatened, as well as gang raped. While the majority community produce many perpetrators of internet paedophilia and one-on-one sex crimes, paedophile gang rape is a crime in which the perpetrators are overwhelmingly Muslim, while their innocent victims are invariably from other communities. In my constituency, 14-year-old Charlene Downs was groomed, raped and murdered. Her body has never been found. The case against 2 Muslim men collapsed on a technicality, but while the police say they are not looking for anyone else, they continue to ignore evidence of jury rigging and to refuse to seek a retrial. Charlene's mother and grandmother bravely campaign actively for justice, with the shocking result that both have been repeatedly threatened with arrest for involvement in entirely peaceful protests. The problem of officialdom turning a blind eye to the inconvenient truth about Islam and sexual violence is thus endemic. I urge those here who are concerned about this issue to face the politically incorrect truth, because denial will not make the problem go away. Justice for Charlene Downs. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Griffin. There are 2 blue cards for you. Do you accept the questions? Okay. Collègue Tarabella, vous avez la parole.
You have the floor, sir.
Well, unfortunately, I'm now giving publicity to the imbecilities that we hear from the most recent colleague who's spoken. Of course, there are individual cases, but you can't accuse Islam to be responsible of violence against women. It's always a mixture of certain deviances, of course, but it can't have a religious or cultural flavour. It's something that's across the world. Don't just talk nonsense here. I mean, obviously, I'm starting on an advert for you. I shouldn't have taken the floor. Perhaps I shouldn't have taken the floor. I needed to point out the nonsense that you were speaking, but I've given you publicity.
Do I reply to that first or take the second question?
Okay, if you prefer. Then, colleague Barachu. You can. Okay.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, Madam President. Violence against women, unfortunately, is a phenomenon which is on the increase. And as we know from the research conducted, social surveys conducted in all countries, we know that these butchers, in inverted commas, cannot be identified as such, and they can't be linked to a particular religion. They can't be linked to a given level of culture or education. They can't be identified as belonging to a particular social category. And I think that, unfortunately, what I've just heard is really a disgrace. We know that the violence perpetrated against women knows no differences. So we can't really point our finger at one religion as opposed to another as being a religion which perpetrates violence against women. I think that this is the wrong approach, and I hope that this Parliament, as is perfectly clear, I hope that this Parliament does not follow this approach.
Colleague Griffin, you have 1 minute to respond to both questions.
While the people on that side of the House are denying the facts, it means that thousands more young girls will suffer as a direct consequence of your denial. Of course Islam is directly involved. When you have a religion which says that a woman's rights in court are half those of a man, when you have a religion which says that a woman who is raped can be stoned to death for adultery unless she can produce 4 male witnesses to prove she's innocent, of course that creates a mentality within that community which is fundamentally anti-women. It started with Muhammad, who raped a captive, a Jewish captive whose husband he just had murdered. He started that. He is regarded by Muslims as the perfect man. His example colours what Muslims do. Many Muslims do not, but within their community this is a real problem. You need to recognise that fact and address it, not run away from it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Colleague Corazza Bildt, for 2 minutes.
I would like to start supporting what my colleague just said, that violence against women and girls is not a matter of religion. This is very important that we recognise in this House, and no religion should be pinpointed. Of course, culture and tradition should never be used to justify violence against women, but you cannot say that it has to do with any religion. Our hearts have been beating strongly in solidarity for women raped in India, and we support the uprising of the civil society. At the same time, from Afghanistan to Europe, still widespread violation of human rights represent among the biggest ones, the most serious, in every corner of the world, and also in our neighbourhoods, our white neighbourhood, Christian neighbourhoods. Violence against women and girls is not a private issue, although every individual woman and girl deserves respect and care for the personal trauma. It is important to break the silence, break the loneliness, break the vicious circle of guilt and fear. There are too many women who live in fear and too many children that witness violence. Therefore, I call on you, Mrs. Reding, to move forward in the strategy to combat violence against women called for in the Stockholm programme a long time ago. I also think that the upcoming UN Commission on Women is an opportunity that the EU should not lose to take part and to give very concrete contribution and action to implement international humanitarian law for women that are raped in conflict and in refugee camps, to take legislation in countries where domestic workers are not covered by the legal rule, to give access to appropriate health care and psychological support, and to create more shelters to ensure protections of victims. In the EU, we have adopted a number of steps forward, but they are not being yet implemented. The protection order, the protection of victims, and the criminalisation of trafficking. We call on Member States to implement them. Time for action has come, and I hope this Parliament will continue to be committed and stand up for zero tolerance to impunity. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, colleague Corazza Bildt. Colleague Griffin would like to ask you a question. Okay, Mr. Griffin.
Thank you. You say your heart beats strongly for women raped in India. Mine does too. But does your heart not also beat for the thousands of young girls gang raped in Britain over the last few years? Or are you simply left in ignorance because the facts are concealed by the controlled liberal media? Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Corazza-Bildt.
Thank you very much for your question. Of course, as I said, it's a global phenomenon, it's a European, and it's in every single neighbourhood. In Britain, you don't have only Muslim people. It's a multicultural society. And I'm sure that you will be able to provide us figures that crimes against girls and women are not only committed by Muslim people. And I hope you will do it in this House. Thank you.
Thank you, Corazza Bildt. Colleague Kleva.